I didn't raise my voice that night. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even correct the lies. At a family event meant to celebrate togetherness, I became the quiet target judged by what I wore, what I earned, and who I loved. Every smile felt like a test. Every question came with a verdict already decided. They spoke as if I wasn't sitting right there, as if my worth could be measured in numbers they assumed I didn't have. I remember gripping my glass, steadying my breath, telling myself to endure. I had done it before. I could do it again. What they didn't know was that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's patience waiting for the truth to arrive on its own time. Beside me, my partner listened. Calm. Unmoved. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct them. He let the room fill with its own arrogance. Because by the end of that night, one simple truth would surface, and everything they believed about me would collapse in front of everyone. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city or country and your local time in the comments. And if stories about quiet strength and late justice speak to you, consider subscribing. You're not alone here. I've spent most of my life learning how to disappear in rooms full of people who share my last name. In my family, success was a language spoken loudly and often salaries announced. Like medals, promotions slipped into conversations the way other families mention the weather. I was fluent enough to understand it, but I never spoke it well. Not in a way that impressed them. Not in a way that counted. Growing up in Ohio, I was always the quiet one. The cousin who did well in school but didn't turn it into something flashy. The daughter who chose stability over spectacle. While others chased prestige, I chose work that felt meaningful to me, even when it didn't look impressive on paper. I worked in community operations for a mid-sized nonprofit, earning just under $68,000 a year after 7 years of steady growth. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid my bills, covered my health insurance, and allowed me to sleep at night without anxiety. To my family, that translated to one thing: I hadn't made it. Family gatherings followed a predictable rhythm. First came the hugs, polite, brief, slightly performative. Then the questions. So what are you doing now? Still at the same place? Any plans to move up or move on? They never asked if I was happy. They asked if I was winning. My younger cousin Daniel, 3 years my junior, had launched a tech startup straight out of college. Every holiday, someone would mention his latest funding round. My Aunt Linda would beam announcing numbers with the pride of a lottery winner. They just closed another $4.2 million, she'd say, glancing around the room to make sure everyone heard. My older sister-in-law, Claire, married into money. Her husband worked in private equity in Chicago, pulling in a salary that sounded unreal to me, north of $400,000 a year, plus bonuses. She wore it effortlessly. Designer shoes, casual references to first-class flights. Every sentence implied that comfort was a birthright, not a privilege. And then there was me. No dramatic failures, no scandals, just ordinary. Ordinary was unforgivable in my family. I learned early that defending myself only made things worse. If I explained my choices, they called it excuses. If I stayed silent, they filled the space with assumptions. Over time, silence became easier. It hurt less to let them believe I wasn't trying than to prove I was. When I met my partner Ethan, I didn't tell my family much about him at first. Not because I was ashamed, because I wanted something that belonged to me alone. We met in Denver 3 years earlier at a mutual friend's dinner party. He was polite, observant, and disarmingly calm, not the kind of man who dominated conversations. He listened. He remembered details. When he asked what I did for work, he didn't follow up with a comparison or a suggestion. He just said, "That sounds important." No one had said that to me in years. Ethan never talked about money unless it was practical. Rent, groceries, travel plans. When I asked about his job, he kept it simple. "I work in strategic consulting." It sounded vague but not evasive. I didn't push. What mattered to me was how safe I felt around him, how seen. When I finally mentioned him to my family, the response was predictable. "What does he do? Where did you meet? Is he stable?" I answered politely. I didn't oversell. I didn't undercut. I just told the truth. They heard what they wanted to hear. By the time the family event was announced, a formal anniversary celebration for my parents hosted at a private event hall outside Columbus, I already knew how it would go. It was a big deal. Over 100 guests, extended family, friends, business associates. A night designed to showcase legacy. Ethan offered not to come. "I know these things can be a lot," he said gently one evening while we were making dinner. I don't want to make it harder for you. That was the moment I realized I loved him. No, I said. I want you there. I just need you to understand something. I told him everything. The comparisons, the comments, the way my presence seemed to invite judgment. I warned him that some people might be rude, that they might assume things about him too. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once and said, "Okay." That was it. No promises to defend me. No declarations of protection. Just acceptance. In the days leading up to the event, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The quiet dread. I chose a simple navy dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would invite commentary. Ethan wore a tailored gray suit. Understated, but elegant. He looked composed in a way that made me feel steadier just standing next to him. On the drive there, I told myself the same thing I always did. Endure. Smile. Let it pass. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't have predicted, was that this time endurance wouldn't be the end of the story. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing alone in that room. And even though I didn't know it yet, the role my family had assigned me, the quiet one, the lesser one, the invisible one, was about to be challenged in a way none of us expected. The event hall sat just outside Columbus, tucked behind a line of tall maples that were already shedding their leaves. From the parking lot, the building looked elegant in a restrained way, cream-colored stone, wide glass doors, warm light spilling out into the dusk. Valets moved quickly, opening doors, greeting guests by name. It was the kind of place chosen deliberately meant to say something without ever saying it out loud. I paused before getting out of the car. Ethan noticed immediately. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. I nodded, even though my stomach felt tight. "Yeah, just, let's get it over with." Inside, the air smelled like polished wood and expensive perfume. Soft music floated through the room, something instrumental and familiar. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in controlled bursts. Everywhere I looked, people were dressed to be seen, tailored suits, cocktail dresses, confident posture. This was my family at their most comfortable. We hadn't taken more than a few steps inside before my mother spotted me. Her smile was bright practiced. "There you are," she said, kissing my cheek lightly. "You're late." "We're right on time," I replied, glancing at my watch. She waved it off. "You know how these things work." Her eyes flicked to Ethan, assessing in a single sweep from his shoes to his watch to the way he stood. "And you must be Ethan." "Yes, ma'am," he said politely. "It's nice to finally meet you." She nodded, already distracted, already scanning the room. "Drinks are over there. Try not to disappear." Disappear. As if that hadn't been my role for years. We moved deeper into the room. Conversations slowed as people noticed us, then resumed softer. I felt it immediately, the subtle shift. Curiosity mixed with judgment. I knew what they saw me unchanged and the man beside me they were trying to place. My Aunt Linda was the first to approach. She looked impeccable as always, pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone. "Well," she said, smiling too widely, "this must be the famous boyfriend." "Partner," I almost corrected. But I didn't. "Yes," I said. "This is Ethan." "And what do you do, Ethan?" she asked, not bothering to hide her interest. "I work in strategic consulting," he replied, offering his hand. She shook it, nodding slowly. "Oh. Consulting." The word hung there unfinished. "For whom?" "For organizations that need long-term planning support," he said evenly. She smiled again, but this time, there was disappointment in it. As if she had hoped for something clearer, bigger, easier to brag about. "Well," she said, turning back to me, "at least you brought someone. That's something. Something. Not someone." I forced a small smile. Ethan didn't react. If anything, his posture stayed relaxed, his expression neutral. As the night went on, the comments came in waves. "So, you're still in nonprofit work. That's admirable. But hard, I imagine. Ever think about doing something more scalable?" Each question landed softly, wrapped in politeness, but the message was always the same. "You're behind. You're less. You don't belong at the center of this room." We made our way to a tall table near the back. It felt safer there, away from the main clusters of conversation. Ethan handed me a glass of water. "You don't have to stay long," he murmured. "I know," I said, "but I will." That was when my cousin Daniel appeared, a drink already in his hand, confidence radiating off him like heat. "Hey," he said, clapping his hand on my shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you here?" I looked at him. "It's Mom and Dad's anniversary." Right, he said, smirking slightly. His gaze shifted to Ethan. And this is… Ethan, my partner said, offering his hand again. Daniel shook it briefly. So consulting, huh? That's tough. Long hours. Insecure contracts. It can be demanding, Ethan replied. Daniel laughed. Yeah, I bet. You know, when you're ready to do something real, let me know. We're always looking for people who want to grow. I felt my face warm. He's doing fine, I said quietly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. I'm sure. Then turning back to Ethan. You should hear what this family's like when you actually make it. He walked away, laughing. I stared down at my glass, my grip tightening. Old instincts told me to swallow it, to let it pass, to stay quiet. Ethan leaned slightly closer. Do you want to step outside? He asked. No, I said. If we leave now, they win. The room grew louder as dinner was announced. People began to take their seats. Ethan and I were placed at a side table, not an accident. I'd seen the seating chart earlier. I knew exactly where we ranked. From across the room, I could see Claire laughing loudly with a group near the front. She caught my eye briefly, then looked away. Halfway through dinner, as dessert plates were being cleared, my Uncle Mark stood to make a toast. He was a successful attorney, respected, authoritative. When he spoke, people listened. He praised my parents, their hard work, their values, their success. Then smiling, he added, and it's good to see that the next generation is carrying that forward. His eyes swept the room, lingering on Daniel, on Claire, and then unmistakably skipping over me. Something inside my chest tightened, not sharp, but heavy. Familiar. Exhausting. I glanced at Ethan, expecting to see anger or discomfort. Instead, he was watching the room with a quiet focus, as if taking notes. That was when I realized something was different. He wasn't shrinking. He wasn't bracing. He was waiting. If there was a moment when the night truly turned against me, it wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with shouting or open confrontation. It came quietly disguised as concern, wrapped in smiles that never quite reached the eyes. After the toast, people began moving again, drifting between tables, refilling drinks. That was when my Aunt Karen approached. She was known in the family as the one who meant well, which usually made her the most dangerous. She leaned in close, her voice soft enough to sound private. Sweetheart, can I ask you something? I nodded, already bracing myself. Are you okay? She asked, glancing briefly at Ethan before looking back at me. I mean, financially, emotionally. These things can be stressful, especially when you're with someone who's still figuring things out. Figuring things out. I felt Ethan stiffen just slightly beside me, a change so subtle no one else would have noticed. I answered before he could. I'm fine, I said. We're fine. She smiled sympathetically. Of course you are. I just worry. You've always been so independent. It would be a shame if you had to carry someone else on top of everything. Carry him. Before I could respond, she patted my arm and moved on, already scanning the room for her next conversation. I exhaled slowly, counting to 3 the way I'd taught myself years ago. I reminded myself why I was here. For my parents, for appearances, for peace. Peace apparently had a very specific price. Not long after the comments stopped pretending to be private. It started when my cousin Megan, Claire's younger sister, raised her voice just enough for people nearby to hear. So, she said, turning toward me with a playful grin, have you two set a date yet? Or are you waiting until things are more stable? A few heads turned. I felt the attention snap into focus like a spotlight. We're not in a rush, I replied evenly. She nodded, eyes flicking again to Ethan. That's probably wise. Weddings are expensive. And expectations can be complicated. Someone chuckled. Someone else murmured agreement. Ethan said nothing. Megan continued, emboldened by the reaction. I just mean, love is great, but reality matters. You know, it's hard when couples aren't on the same level. Same level. I felt something twist inside me, not anger, not yet, but something closer to grief. The realization that no matter how carefully I behaved, how small I made myself, it would never be enough. I looked around the table. No one intervened. No one changed the subject. They were enjoying this. Daniel reappeared. Drink, refreshed, confidence intact. What's this? He asked. Relationship counseling? Megan laughed. Just talking about priorities? Daniel smirked. Yeah, priorities matter. Especially if you want to keep up with the family. He turned to Ethan. No offense, man, but this isn't exactly a forgiving crowd. Standards are high. That was when I spoke again, my voice quiet but firm. That's enough. Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax. We're just having fun. Fun. I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to let it show. I stared down at the tablecloth, tracing the pattern with my eyes, grounding myself. Ethan shifted beside me, not forward, not back, just enough to signal that he was there. Across the room, my Uncle Mark had been watching. I saw it in the way his gaze lingered, calculating. He stepped closer, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Everything all right here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Of course," Daniel said quickly. "Just catching up." Mark nodded, then turned his attention to me. "You know," he said, voice calm but carrying easily, "this family values ambition, drive. It's not about money necessarily. It's about direction." He paused, letting that sink in. "Some people," he continued, "mistake comfort for progress. They settle. And settling can look a lot like stability, until it doesn't." The implication was clear. I was the cautionary tale. I felt dozens of eyes on me now, waiting, measuring my reaction. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I lifted my head. "I'm not settled," I said quietly. "I'm stable." A ripple of murmurs followed. Mark smiled thinly. "Stability is good," he said. "As long as it's earned." That did it. Something inside me went still, not numb, resolved. I realized then that no explanation, no defense, no quiet dignity would ever satisfy them. They weren't confused about me. They had decided. Ethan looked at me, really looked at me, as if asking a question without words. "Are you ready?" I didn't know what he meant. "Not yet." Mark turned to Ethan next. "And you," he said, polite but probing. "You seem reserved." "What exactly is it that you do again?" "Strategic consulting," Ethan replied. Mark nodded. "Right. Freelance." Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Not exactly." Mark smiled the way lawyers do when they sense weakness. "Well, whatever it is, I hope it allows you to support her. This family can be demanding." There it was, the final line, the quiet declaration that I was a burden, a liability, something to be managed. The room held its breath. I felt the familiar urge to shrink, to apologize for existing. Instead, Ethan did something unexpected. He smiled. Not defensively, not nervously, calmly. "Actually," he said, his voice even but unmistakably clear, "that might be something we should talk about." Every conversation around us began to slow. Chairs shifted, heads turned. I felt my heart begin to race, because for the first time that night Ethan wasn't waiting anymore. When Ethan spoke, it wasn't loud enough to silence the room all at once. It didn't need to be. His voice carried in a different way, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore once you realized it was meant to be heard. "Maybe this isn't the best place," my mother said quickly, her smile tightening as she sensed the shift. Ethan turned to her politely. "I understand. I'll be brief." That alone was enough to draw attention. People nearby angled their bodies toward us, conversations dissolving into murmurs. I felt my pulse quicken, a strange mix of dread and disbelief settling in my chest. Ethan looked at me first. "Is this okay?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. For years I had survived by keeping things small, controlled, predictable. This wasn't any of those things. But something in his expression, calm, respectful, grounded, made me nod. "Yes," I said. "It's okay." He turned back to the group, his posture relaxed but assured. "I didn't come tonight to explain myself," he began. "And I didn't come to defend her. She doesn't need that." A few eyebrows lifted. Daniel shifted his weight, suddenly less amused. But Ethan continued. "I am hearing a lot of assumptions. About her choices, about her value, and about me." He paused, letting the words settle. "I think it's fair to clarify a few things." My Uncle Mark folded his arms. "By all means." Ethan nodded. "I'm not a freelancer, and I don't figure things out for a living." A couple of people laughed softly, assuming this was going to be a self-deprecating explanation. Ethan didn't join them. "I work as a senior partner in a strategic advisory firm based in Denver," he said. "We specialize in long-term infrastructure and compliance planning for public-private initiatives." The words were precise, formal, not bragging but unmistakably serious. Mark's expression shifted slightly. Which firm? Ethan met his gaze. Northridge Advisory. That name landed differently. I saw it in the way Mark's eyes narrowed, in the way my cousin Daniel stopped smiling, in the way a man 2 tables over leaned closer, his interest suddenly piqued. Mark cleared his throat. "Northridge, as in the firm handling the Midwestern municipal restructuring contracts." Yes, Ethan said. Among others. Silence spread outward, subtle but undeniable. Daniel scoffed lightly. A lot of firms use similar names. Ethan nodded. That's true. Ours happens to be the one with the federal clearance. That did it. A murmur rippled through the room. Not loud. Just enough. My mother's smile faded. My Aunt Linda looked suddenly unsure. Mark studied Ethan carefully now, reassessing. And your role there, Ethan, didn't hesitate. I oversee strategic compliance and risk mitigation. My team handles contracts averaging between $15 and $40 million. I felt dizzy, not because of the numbers, but because of how calmly he said them, as if they were just facts, as if he hadn't been carrying this quietly the entire night. The entire relationship. Daniel laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. So you're saying you're some kind of executive? Ethan glanced at him. I'm saying my compensation last year was $920,000 before bonuses. After bonuses, it was just over $1.3 million. The room went completely still. Someone dropped a fork. I heard it hit the floor sharp and unmistakable. I stared straight ahead, my hands clenched in my lap. I hadn't known the exact numbers. I hadn't asked. I suddenly understood why. Mark exhaled slowly. That's substantial. Ethan nodded. It's adequate. The word was almost gentle. Megan's smile had disappeared entirely. She glanced around, searching for something to say. And the reason you didn't mention any of this before, Mark asked. Ethan looked at me again. Because it's not how she measures people. And I follow her lead. Something inside my chest cracked open. Not relief. Something deeper. Validation. Daniel shifted again. Well, if that's the case, then surely, let me finish, Ethan said, still calm but firmer now. Daniel stopped. I didn't come here to impress anyone, Ethan continued. And I'm not interested in your approval. What I am interested in is making sure the person I love is treated with basic respect. No one spoke. Ethan turned slightly, gesturing toward the room. You've questioned her ambition, her intelligence, her judgment. Not once tonight did anyone ask her what she wanted, or what she's built, or why she's chosen the life she has. My throat tightened. She works in nonprofit operations, Ethan went on. She manages a regional program serving over 1,2,000 people annually. Her team runs on a budget under $3 million, and they've met every compliance audit for the past 5 years. Mark blinked. Is that so? Ethan nodded. Yes, it is. And she did it without family connections, without capital, and without needing to perform success for anyone else. The silence felt heavy now. Charged. Ethan took a breath. So if we're talking about standards about earning stability, I'd say she's exceeded them. I felt my eyes sting, but I refused to look down. Mark uncrossed his arms slowly. I see. Around us, faces shifted. Calculations recalculated. The room was reordering itself. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply told the truth. And in that moment, I understood something I never had before. They weren't uncomfortable because they'd misjudged him. They were uncomfortable because they'd misjudged me. The silence after Ethan finished speaking was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't confused. It was unsettled, like a room that had just realized the ground beneath it wasn't as solid as everyone assumed. People didn't rush to respond. They didn't laugh it off. They didn't immediately congratulate him. Instead, they did something far more revealing. They recalculated. I could see it in their eyes, in the subtle shifts of posture, in the way bodies angled toward Ethan now instead of away from me. Conversations that had once excluded us began inching closer, drawn by the gravity of new information. Not truth status. My Aunt Linda cleared her throat first. Well, she said lightly, forcing a smile, that's impressive. You could have mentioned that earlier. Ethan didn't respond. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he seemed unsure of what would land safely. The easy confidence he'd carried all night had fractured, replaced by something brittle. Mark broke the silence, his tone careful now. I wasn't aware of your firm's involvement at that level, he said. We may have crossed paths professionally. Possibly, Ethan replied. Our work tends to stay behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. I thought of every time I'd been told my work didn't matter because it wasn't visible enough, because it didn't shine. Megan tried to recover next. I just think it's wonderful, she said, her voice suddenly warm, that you've both done so well in your own ways. In your own ways. as if she hadn't just questioned whether my life choices were viable. My mother finally stepped forward. Her face was tight, eyes darting between Ethan and me. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. Not accusatory, not curious. Uncomfortable. I answered before Ethan could. "Because you never asked," I said quietly. The words landed harder than I expected. My mother blinked, caught off guard. "We ask all the time," she said defensively. "No," I replied. "You ask what people earn, what they own, who they know. You don't ask who they are." The room stilled again. I hadn't planned to speak. I hadn't rehearsed anything. But now that I had started, something inside me refused to retreat. For years I continued, my voice steady, despite the pounding in my chest. "I've sat in this room while you decided what I was worth, based on assumptions, based on comparisons, and I let you. Because I thought keeping the peace meant staying quiet." I looked around at my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, at the people who had watched me shrink and called it humility. "But peace that only exists when one person stays small isn't peace," I said. "It's control." No one interrupted me. Daniel looked down at his glass. Megan stared at the floor. Even Mark had gone, still listening. "I didn't bring Ethan here to prove anything," I said. "I brought him because he treats me with respect, something I assumed family would do automatically." My voice faltered for half a second. I steadied it. "I don't need anyone's approval. And I don't need anyone to be impressed. What I need is for this to stop." I gestured vaguely, encompassing the entire evening, the years behind it. The silence stretched. For a moment I wondered if I'd gone too far, if I'd broken some unspoken rule that couldn't be repaired. Then Mark spoke again, slower this time. "You're right," he said. "This went too far." I turned to him, surprised. "This family," he continued, "has always measured success in very specific ways, and sometimes that makes us careless. Careless. A careful word. A lawyer's word." But he added, "Intent doesn't erase impact." He looked at Daniel. "You owe her an apology." Daniel stiffened. "I was just an apology," Mark repeated. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ethan, then at me. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "If anything I said came across the wrong way, came across, it wasn't sincere, but it was public, and that mattered." Megan followed, her voice small. "I didn't mean to judge. I'm sorry." Others murmured, variations of the same thing. Polite, controlled, carefully worded. My mother said nothing. Instead, she looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not pride, something closer to loss. As if she were realizing that the version of me she'd relied on, the quiet one, the accommodating one, was gone. Dinner resumed in fits and starts. People returned to their seats, though the energy had shifted completely. Conversations were subdued, now cautious. No one joked loudly. No one boasted. Ethan and I remained where we were, side by side. He didn't touch me. He didn't guide the moment. He simply stayed present. Halfway through dessert, a man I didn't recognize approached our table. He was older, distinguished, wearing a pin on his lapel I recognized from my work, one associated with a federal oversight committee. "Ethan," he said, nodding. "Didn't expect to see you here." Ethan stood, shaking his hand. "Good to see you, Robert." The man turned to me. "You must be the reason he finally takes a night off," he said with a faint smile. Ethan didn't deny it. Robert leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you ever need anything," he said to me, "our office works closely with organizations like yours, nonprofits doing real work." I blinked. "Thank you." He nodded once and walked away. I felt my heart race again, not from fear this time, but from the sheer strangeness of it all. Doors opening, not because I asked, but because someone else finally acknowledged my presence. Ethan sat back down. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. And for the first time I meant it. Across the room my mother watched us. After a moment she approached. "I didn't realize," she said quietly. I met her gaze. "I know." She hesitated. "I should have protected you more." I nodded. "Yes, you should have. It wasn't cruel, it was honest." She swallowed, then nodded once and walked away. As the evening wound down, people said their goodbyes differently than they'd greeted us. Slower, more careful. Some even looked embarrassed. Ethan and I waited until the crowd thinned before heading toward the exit. As we walked out into the cool night air, I felt something lift from my chest, something I hadn't known I was carrying. I hadn't won by arguing. I hadn't won by proving them wrong. I'd won by finally refusing to disappear. The parking lot was nearly empty when we stepped outside, the distant hum of traffic, replacing the carefully curated music from inside. I stood still for a moment, breathing in the cool air, letting it ground me. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the release of something long held in place. Ethan waited beside me without speaking. He always did, that gave space without withdrawing. After a few seconds, I laughed softly, surprised by the sound. I didn't plan to say any of that, I admitted. He smiled. You didn't need to. We walked to the car slowly. Each step felt lighter, as if the building behind us had been holding gravity captive, and we'd finally escaped its pull. I glanced back once, watching silhouettes move behind the glass doors, already rearranging themselves into new stories. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past. Neither of us spoke for several miles. I replayed the night in my head, the comments, the stares, the moment my voice stopped shaking and became steady. It felt unreal, like watching a version of myself I hadn't known existed. I'm sorry, I said suddenly. Ethan glanced at me. For what? For putting you in that position, I said. For not preparing you. For he shook his head gently. You didn't put me anywhere. I chose to be there. I nodded, swallowing. I didn't know the numbers. The details. I know, he said. That was intentional. I turned toward him. Why? Because I wanted you to choose me without the noise, he replied. And I wanted to choose you without using my work as leverage. The words settled between us, heavy and sincere. At home, we kicked off our shoes and sat on the couch, the quiet wrapping around us like a blanket. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I always thought if I just stayed calm enough, patient enough, they'd eventually see me, I said. Tonight made me realize they were never really looking. Ethan nodded. People see what confirms their assumptions. I closed my eyes. For the first time, that truth didn't sting. The next morning, my phone began to buzz before I'd finished my coffee. First was Megan. A text. I've been thinking about last night. I'm really sorry. I hope we can talk. Then Daniel. Didn't mean to make things awkward. Congrats to Ethan. Maybe we grab a drink sometime. I stared at the messages, feeling strangely detached. There was no rush to respond. No urgency to smooth things over. My mother called an hour later. I want to apologize, she said, her voice subdued. Not for last night, for everything before it. I listened without interrupting. I didn't realize how much pressure we put on you, she continued. I thought pushing you would motivate you. It didn't, I said gently. It just made me quieter. She exhaled. I see that now. After we hung up, I sat quietly, letting the morning settle. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something fundamental had shifted. Later that afternoon, Ethan and I walked through the neighborhood park, leaves crunching underfoot. Children played on the swings. A couple argued softly on a bench, then laughed. Ordinary life uninterrupted. I've been thinking, I said, about what happens next. He waited. I don't want revenge, I said. I don't want to prove anything. I just want boundaries. That sounds reasonable, he replied. I don't want to be measured every time I walk into a room, I said. I don't want my worth negotiated. He stopped walking, turning to face me. Then don't negotiate. It was so simple it almost made me laugh. That evening, I drafted an email to the family group thread. I read it 3 times before sending. I love you. But going forward, I won't participate in conversations that rank people by income status or comparison. If that continues, I'll step away. This isn't a punishment. It's a boundary. I hit send and felt a strange calm wash over me. Responses trickled in slowly. Some supportive, some defensive, some silent. I didn't chase the silence. Days passed, then weeks. The next family gathering came and went without me. No drama, no confrontation, just absence. And in that absence, something healed. At work, I noticed changes too, not in my role, but in how I carried myself. I spoke up in meetings. I advocated for my team. I asked for resources instead of apologizing for needing them. When my annual review came around, my supervisor slid a paper across the desk. We're promoting you to regional director, she said. Salary will be $92,000 starting next quarter. I smiled, not because of the number, but because I knew it didn't define me. That night, Ethan and I celebrated with takeout and a bottle of wine we'd been saving. We toasted quietly, privately. To being seen, I said. To choosing yourself, he replied. Months later, my Uncle Mark invited us to a public panel he was hosting, Law, Ethics, Accountability. Ethan declined politely. I attended alone. During the Q&A, someone asked about success and legacy. Mark answered thoughtfully, carefully. When he finished, he looked at me in the audience and nodded almost imperceptibly. Afterward, he approached. "You handled yourself with integrity," he said. "That matters." I smiled. It always did. As we parted, I realized something important: validation feels different when you no longer need it. That night at the family event wasn't the climax of my story. It was the turning point, the moment the power shifted quietly, irrevocably. I didn't win because of who Ethan was. I won because I stopped agreeing with who they said I was. And that made all the difference. I thought the worst of it was over. That assumption lasted exactly 9 days. It began with an email from my mother sent to the entire family thread. Subject line: carefully neutral tone, deceptively calm. "We need to talk. In person. This concerns the family." I read it twice, feeling the old tension creep back into my shoulders. Ethan noticed immediately. "You don't have to go," he said. "I know," I replied. "But this feels different." It was different. I could sense it. The night at the event hadn't just embarrassed people, it had destabilized a hierarchy. And families like mine didn't let that happen without trying to restore order. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at my parents' house. Not a restaurant, not neutral ground, home turf. When we arrived, the driveway was already full. Cars lined the street. This wasn't a conversation, it was an assembly. Inside, the living room felt smaller than I remembered. Chairs had been arranged in a loose semicircle like an intervention. My stomach tightened. Daniel was there, Megan, Aunt Linda, Uncle Mark, 2 relatives I barely spoke to anymore. And unexpectedly, a man in a tailored suit I didn't recognize holding a leather folder on his lap. That was my first warning. My mother gestured for us to sit. Ethan and I took 2 chairs at the edge of the circle. No one offered us water. No one smiled. Mark cleared his throat. "This isn't personal," he began, which was always how he prefaced things that were deeply personal. "This is about protecting the family." I stayed silent. "There have been concerns," he continued, "about the information shared at the anniversary event." I glanced at Ethan. He was calm, attentive. "What concerns?" I asked. Mark exchanged a look with the man holding the folder. "Some of us feel that there may have been misrepresentation." My heart skipped. "About what?" "About Ethan's role," Daniel said quickly. "His credentials, his claims." There it was. The air felt thick, charged with something ugly. Fear, maybe, or resentment dressed up as responsibility. "So you called a family meeting," I said slowly, "to question my partner's identity." "We called a meeting," my mother said, "to clarify things." The man with the folder finally spoke. "I'm a private compliance consultant," he said, offering a brief nod. "I was asked to verify certain statements." I felt my hands curl into fists. "You hired someone," I said, "to investigate him." Daniel shrugged. "When someone drops numbers like that in public, it raises questions." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You could have asked me directly." Mark raised a hand. "Given the circumstances, we thought it best to proceed cautiously." I laughed once sharply. Cautiously or defensively? No one answered. The consultant opened his folder. "We reached out to Northridge Advisory," he said. "Their communications department confirmed Ethan's employment and seniority." I exhaled, slow and controlled. But he continued, "There are additional layers." My pulse quickened. "Northridge holds several federal contracts," the consultant said, "some of which fall under confidentiality restrictions." Ethan nodded. "Correct." Daniel leaned forward. "So you can't talk about it." "I can talk about what's public," Ethan replied. "And what's relevant." Mark's jaw tightened. "What's relevant is whether you used your position to intimidate or manipulate this family." I stared at him. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Mark asked. "Your sudden appearance, the timing, the numbers, it shifted dynamics. Some people felt exposed." There it was again. Not concern. Threat. Ethan's voice remained level. "I stated facts when prompted. I didn't threaten anyone." Mark turned to me. "You benefited from it." I felt something in me go very still. "You think I needed his resume to justify my existence?" I asked quietly. Silence. That was when Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. He removed a slim document envelope and placed it on the coffee table. "I anticipated this," he said. Everyone leaned forward. "These are public filings," he continued. "Contract summaries, compensation disclosures, and a letter from our legal department confirming my authority to speak on these matters." He slid the envelope toward the consultant. The man opened it, scanning quickly. His expression changed, subtle but unmistakable. "This is thorough," he said. Ethan nodded. "It's necessary." Mark frowned. "What's that documentation?" Ethan replied. Since credibility seems to be in question, the consultant cleared his throat. "Everything here checks out." Daniel's face flushed. "So that's it." "Not quite," Ethan said. He reached into the envelope again and placed a second document on the table. "This," he said, "is a memorandum from a federal oversight office." I recognized the seal immediately, the same one I'd seen on Robert's lapel. Ethan continued. "It states that any attempt to discredit or coerce individuals associated with federally contracted personnel through private investigations or intimidation can constitute interference." The room froze. Mark stared at the paper. "Are you threatening us?" "No," Ethan said calmly. "I'm informing you." My mother's voice trembled. "Is this serious?" "Yes," Ethan said. "It is." The consultant swallowed. "I wasn't informed of this aspect." "You weren't meant to be," Ethan replied, "because this isn't about enforcement. It's about boundaries." He turned to me. "She didn't ask for this," he said to the room. "She didn't ask me to speak. She didn't ask me to reveal anything. All she asked for was respect." I felt my chest tighten. "And instead," he continued, "you convened a meeting to challenge her credibility by proxy." Mark looked shaken now. "We were just trying to protect your hierarchy," I interrupted. The word hung there. I stood slowly. My legs felt steady, strong. "I spent my life thinking I was the problem," I said. "That if I were just more impressive, more visible, more successful by your standards, I'd finally earn peace." I looked around the room. Tonight confirms what I learned at the event. It was never about my effort. It was about your comfort. No one spoke. "I won't participate in this anymore," I said. "Not the comparisons. Not the interrogations. Not the investigations." I turned to my mother. "I love you. But if protecting the family means undermining me, then I'm done protecting appearances." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't argue. Ethan stood beside me. "This is your notice," he said calmly. "Any further action of this kind will be handled through proper channels." Mark looked defeated. "Understood." The consultant closed his folder. "I'll excuse myself." As he left, the room felt hollow, drained of its authority. We didn't wait for anyone to speak. We walked out together. And for the first time, I understood what real power felt like. Not domination, not exposure, but the quiet certainty that no one gets to put you on trial for knowing your worth. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be said had already settled between us, heavy and complete. The streetlights passed in steady intervals, marking time. I watched them blur against the windshield and felt something unfamiliar growing inside me. Not relief, closure. At home, I changed into sweatpants and made tea. Ordinary motions. Grounding ones. Ethan sat at the kitchen table reviewing something on his phone, then set it aside when he noticed me watching him. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Then after a pause, "I think I finally am." We sat together in the quiet, the kind that doesn't demand conversation. Outside, the city hummed, distant sirens, a passing train horn, life continuing as it always had. Inside, something fundamental had ended. The next week was strangely calm. No family messages, no calls, no passive-aggressive check-ins. The silence felt intentional, like a truce neither side wanted to break. I didn't rush to fill it. At work, I focused on a compliance review for one of our largest programs, a federal grant renewal that required meticulous documentation, spreadsheets, audits, deadlines, the kind of work I'd always done, well quietly, without applause. On Thursday afternoon, my supervisor stopped by my office. "I heard from someone interesting today," she said casually. My stomach tightened. "Who, a consultant from a federal oversight group," she replied. "They asked about our operations, praised your leadership, and mentioned you by name." I blinked. "By name," she smiled. "Yes. Apparently, you've built quite a reputation for clean audits and ethical management." I sat back, stunned. "They're expanding a pilot program next year," she continued. "We've been invited to apply. I want you to lead the proposal." I nodded slowly. I'd be honored. After she left, I closed my office door and sat in silence, letting it wash over me. Not pride, recognition, earned specific and unforced. That evening, Daniel texted, "Can we talk, just you and me?" I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. What about everything he wrote? I messed up. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our places. Neutral territory. When he arrived, he looked different, less polished, more uncertain. I didn't know he began not meeting my eyes. About the investigation. About how far it went. I know, I said. He sighed. I was scared. Of what, that if you weren't less, then maybe I wasn't more, he admitted. The comparison was the only thing I had. The honesty surprised me. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I'm not interested in going back to how things were. I don't want that either, he said quickly. I just want a chance to start over. I really considered him for the first time without the old weight of expectation. Start by stopping the comparisons, I said. With me, with anyone. He nodded. I can do that. We parted without hugging, without promises, just a shared understanding that something had shifted and that it would take time to see what survived the shift. A week later, my mother came by unannounced. She stood at the door holding a small box. I won't stay long, she said softly. We sat at the kitchen table. She slid the box toward me. Inside were old photos, me as a child smiling wide, holding a science fair ribbon, standing proudly beside a poster board. I forgot who you were before I started measuring you, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. I felt tears sting my eyes. I needed you to see me then. Not now. She nodded. I know. When she left, the box stayed on the table long after the door closed. I opened it again later that night, looking at the girl I used to be, the one who believed her. Curiosity and kindness were enough. They still were. The following month, my parents hosted another gathering. Smaller, more restrained. Ethan and I declined the invitation. No explanation, no drama. Instead, we spent the evening cooking together, music playing softly in the background. We talked about the future not in grand plans but in shared values. Where we wanted to live. What kind of life felt honest? I don't need your world, I told him, and I don't want mine used as a lesson. He smiled. Good. I don't want to be anyone's reveal. A few days later, I received a formal letter in the mail. Inside was a written apology from my Uncle Mark. Not a text, not a call, a letter. He acknowledged the investigation, the overreach, the damage done. He stated clearly that he had acted out of fear of losing control, not concern. He asked for forgiveness without expectation. I read it once, then again. I didn't respond. Forgiveness, I'd learned, didn't require reopening doors. At work, the pilot proposal was approved. Funding secured. My role expanded. More responsibility. More trust. Not because of who I knew, but because of what I'd built. One evening, as Ethan and I walked through the park again, he squeezed my hand gently. You know, he said, none of this would have happened if you hadn't spoken up. I shook my head. It would have. Just not all at once. I stopped walking, turning to face him. They shamed me because they thought I needed their approval to exist, I said. They were wrong. He nodded. They usually are. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the path, I felt something settle into place. Not victory. Alignment. My life no longer revolved around proving anyone wrong. It revolved around choosing what was right. And that quiet, steady, unshakable was the kind of justice that lasted. The first time I saw my family again after everything happened, it wasn't planned. I ran into my Aunt Linda at a grocery store on a Tuesday evening, standing in the frozen food aisle, staring at 2 brands of organic vegetables like the decision carried moral weight. For a second, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, really looked without the buffer of an audience or expectations. Oh, she said finally. Hi. Hi, I replied. She smiled, but it was smaller than I remembered. Less practiced. How are you? I'm good, I said. And I realized it was true. She hesitated. Your mother mentioned you've been busy. I nodded. Work's been full. There it was, the opening, the familiar invitation to ask more, to assess. She didn't take it. That's good, she said simply. You always were responsible. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't validation. But it wasn't a comparison either. And for the first time, that felt like enough. We parted with a brief nod. As I walked away, I noticed my shoulders weren't tense. My heart wasn't racing. The encounter didn't linger. That's when I understood how much power I'd given away before by waiting for people to define me. A few days later, the nonprofit hosted a public town hall. Community leaders, donors, local officials. A packed room. I stood at the podium presenting our annual impact report, metrics, outcomes, stories of families served. As I spoke, I noticed a familiar face in the third row. My Uncle Mark. He sat quietly, hands folded, listening, not scrutinizing, not leading, just present. When the session ended, people approached with questions and compliments. Mark waited until the room thinned. "You did well," he said. "Thank you," I replied. He nodded. "You always did. I just didn't see it." I met his gaze. "That's on you." He accepted that without flinching. "I know," he said. "I'm trying to learn." We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile. But we stood on equal ground. That mattered. Later that night, Ethan and I talked about it over dinner. "Do you feel different around them now?" he asked. "Yes," I said after a moment. "But not because they changed." He smiled. "Because you did." Exactly. Weeks turned into months. The family dynamic adjusted awkwardly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Invitations became more careful, conversations less intrusive. Some people faded, others stayed cautiously. Daniel invited me to lunch one afternoon. We talked about work, about burnout, about pressure. He admitted he'd started therapy. "I realized I don't actually know who I am without outperforming someone," he said. "That's a hard realization," I replied. "But a necessary one," he said. I believed him. At home, Ethan and I settled into a rhythm that felt honest. No grand gestures, no public statements, just consistency, trust, quiet support. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights, he turned to me. "I need to ask you something," he said. I smiled. "Okay. Do you ever worry," he asked, "that people will think you stayed because of my job?" I thought about it. About how that question would have once haunted me. "No," I said, "because I know why I stayed." He nodded, relieved. "And if they think that I added, that's their story, not mine." The following spring, my parents hosted a charity fundraiser. This time they asked me to help plan it. I agreed on my terms. Clear roles, clear expectations. No commentary on appearances or status. They accepted. During the event, my mother pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you," she said. I studied her face. "For what? For standing your ground," she said. "Even when it made me uncomfortable." I nodded. "That means more than you know." As the night wound down, a woman approached me, someone I didn't recognize. "I just wanted to say," she said quietly, "I saw how you handled yourself at the anniversary event. It mattered." I blinked. "You were there," she nodded. "My daughter was too." She asked me later why you didn't yell back. "And what did you tell her?" I asked. "That strength doesn't always make noise," she said. "Sometimes it just refuses to bend." I thanked her, feeling something warm settle in my chest. That was when it fully clicked. The justice I'd been waiting for didn't arrive with applause or public vindication. It arrived in moments like this, quiet acknowledgments, internal shifts, the steady alignment between who I was and how I lived. They shamed me at a family event because they believed shame worked. They were wrong. It only works when you accept it. By the time summer arrived, the past felt distant, not erased, but integrated. A chapter closed without bitterness. One afternoon, as I packed away old papers, I found notes I'd written years earlier, lists of goals that revolved around proving myself. Impress them, outperform them, be undeniable. I smiled, folded the paper, and threw it away. I didn't need to be undeniable anymore. I was already standing. The last confrontation didn't happen at a family gathering or across a dinner table or even face to face. It happened quietly on a Tuesday afternoon in a courthouse hallway I had never expected to walk through. Our nonprofit had been selected for a federal compliance review routine scheduled transparent. The kind of thing that happened every few years when your programs grew large enough to matter. I wasn't nervous. Our records were clean. Our audits meticulous. Still, the process required present signatures, testimony, accountability in its purest form. Ethan offered to come with me. "Not as backup," he said. "Just support." I agreed. The courthouse was modern and unremarkable, gray stone glass walls, security checkpoints humming with efficiency. Inside, everything smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. We sat on a bench outside a conference room waiting to be called. That was when I saw my Uncle Mark. He stood at the far end of the hall, speaking in low tones with another attorney. When his eyes met mine, he froze. Just for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked toward us. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I could say the same," I replied. He hesitated, then gestured toward the room. "I'm representing a client in an unrelated matter." Ethan remained silent, observant. Mark looked at me, really looked at me, and something shifted in his expression. Not discomfort. Recognition. "You're here professionally," he said. Yes, I answered. I'm the compliance director for the organization under review. He nodded slowly. Of course you are. There was no sarcasm in his voice. No challenge, just fact. A clerk opened the door and called my name. As I stood, Mark spoke again. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you're handling this the right way. I met his gaze. I always have. Inside the room, the review panel was thorough but respectful. We went through budgets, protocols, oversight structures. I answered questions clearly, calmly, with documentation to support every claim. When it was over, the lead auditor smiled. Your organization sets a high standard, she said. Thank you for your transparency. As we left the building, Ethan squeezed my hand. You were incredible, he said. I was prepared, I replied. There's a difference. Outside, the sky was bright, the air sharp with early fall. I felt steady, grounded. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. This is Claire. I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. Hi. I owe you an apology, she wrote. Not the polite kind, the real one. We met a week later at a quiet cafe. She looked different than I remembered, less polished, more tired. I built my identity on being the successful one, she said. And when you didn't play along, I punished you for it. I listened without interrupting. I saw how everyone treated you, she continued. And I let it happen because it made me feel secure. Secure in what I asked gently. In being above someone, she admitted. That's not something I'm proud of. Silence stretched between us. I don't need you to forgive me, she said. I just needed you to know I see it now. I nodded. Seeing it is the work. We didn't reconcile fully. We didn't need to. The conversation wasn't about rebuilding closeness, it was about accountability. As autumn deepened, life continued to expand in ways that felt earned. The pilot program launched successfully. Our team grew. I hired 2 new managers, mentored them carefully, intentionally. I made space for their voices. At home, Ethan and I talked about the future, not framed by defense or secrecy, but by choice. One night, as we sat at the kitchen table reviewing travel plans, he reached into his bag and placed a small folder in front of me. What's this? I asked. A contract, he said lightly, or the absence of one. I opened it. Inside was a letter from his firm confirmation of a sabbatical offer. 12 months. Optional. No penalties. I want to step back, he said. Not because I need to, but because I want to build something with you that isn't constantly interrupted. I looked at him, heart full. You don't need to do that for me. I know, he said. I'm doing it with you. We decided together, no rush, no pressure. Partnership in its truest form. The final shift came unexpectedly at another family event months later. Smaller, quieter. I attended alone. This time, no one asked about my salary. No one questioned my choices. Conversations stayed respectful if cautious. Near the end of the night, a distant cousin approached me. I heard what happened last year, she said. It changed things. How? I asked. People think twice now, she said. About who they underestimate. I smiled. Good. As I drove home, I thought about everything that had unfolded, not as a dramatic victory, but as a gradual reclaiming. I hadn't overpowered anyone. I hadn't embarrassed anyone. I had simply refused to accept a version of myself that didn't fit. That was my justice. Not loud, not sudden, but undeniable. The last piece didn't fall into place with confrontation or applause. It arrived quietly the way most permanent things do. It was early winter when my parents asked if they could come over. Not for a meeting, not for a discussion, just dinner. The request was careful, respectful, very different from how things used to be. I agreed. They arrived with takeout from my favorite restaurant, the one they used to call a waste of money. My mother noticed that immediately and winced at herself. I remembered this time, she said softly. We ate at the kitchen table, no speeches, no agendas, just conversation about traffic, weather work, ordinary things. And for the first time, I realized how rarely we'd ever done that spoken without measuring. After dinner, my father cleared his throat. I want to say something, he said. I didn't interrupt. I spent a long time thinking my job was to prepare you for a hard world, he continued. So I made your world harder than it needed to be. My mother stared at her hands. I thought pressure made people stronger, he said. What I see now is that it just taught you how to survive alone. The words landed gently but deeply. I don't need apologies that erase the past, I said. I need honesty that changes the future. He nodded. That's fair. There was no promise of perfection, no dramatic reconciliation, just accountability, real, imperfect, but sincere. When they left, I stood at the door for a long time after it closed, not sad, not relieved, complete. In the weeks that followed, I noticed something unexpected. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped bracing myself before phone calls. I stopped wondering how I was being perceived. Without the constant background noise of judgment, my thoughts felt clearer, my decisions lighter. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was choosing. At work, the pilot program expanded beyond projections. We secured additional funding. I was invited to speak at a regional conference, not as a token, not as a story, but as an expert. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room full of people taking notes, I felt grounded. Not elevated. Grounded. Afterward, a young woman approached me. "I grew up in a family like yours," she said quietly. "Watching you speak made me realize I don't have to explain myself to everyone." I smiled. "You don't." That night, Ethan and I talked late into the evening, sitting on the floor with our backs against the couch. "I used to think justice meant exposure," I said. "That people had to be embarrassed for balance to be restored." And now, he asked. "Now I think justice is alignment," I replied. "When your life finally matches your values." He nodded. "That's harder to take away." We made decisions slowly after that. Intentionally. Not as a reaction to anything, but as an extension of who we were becoming. We moved to a quieter neighborhood. I kept my job. He took his sabbatical. Our days became simpler, not smaller, but clearer. Occasionally, family members would reach out, some with curiosity, some with genuine effort, some with nothing to say at all. I met each one where they were without over-explaining, without retreating. At the next large family event, I attended with Ethan, but we arrived late and left early. Not out of fear, out of choice. No one questioned us, no one tested us. The hierarchy had lost its grip. Toward the end of the evening, my Aunt Karen pulled me aside, the same one who once wrapped judgment in concern. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I confused control with care." I nodded. "A lot of people do." She hesitated. "How did you stop letting it affect you?" I thought about it for a moment. "I didn't stop caring," I said. "I stopped agreeing." She absorbed that quietly. On the drive home, Ethan reached for my hand. "You know, he said they'll talk about that night for years." I smiled faintly. "That's okay. I don't need to be the story anymore." Because the truth was simple. They shamed me at a family event because they believed shame kept order. They believed hierarchy created worth. They believed silence meant weakness. They were wrong. Silence can be strength. Patience can be power. And dignity doesn't require permission. I didn't win because my partner revealed who he was. I won because I finally stood without shrinking before, during, and after the reveal. If you've ever been the quiet one in the room, the one measured unfairly, the one who learned to survive by staying small, know this. You don't owe anyone proof of your value. You don't need a dramatic moment to be legitimate. And justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as peace. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part stayed with you the most? And if you believe in stories where quiet strength finally stands tall, consider subscribing. You're welcome here.